an IP phone supports LLDP, you can enable LLDP and voice VLAN on the switch to provide VoIP access. The switch then uses LLDP to deliver the voice VLAN ID to the IP phone and increases the packet priority through the voice VLAN. In the network shown in the figure, the customer requires IP phones and PCs to connect to the network simultaneously. As users' IP phones support LLDP, IP phones can obtain a voice VLAN ID through LLDP and attach voice VLAN tags to packets that IP phones send, and the voice packets have a low COS priority. The network plan should meet the following requirements. Voice packets are transmitted in VLAN 100, and data packets from a PC are transmitted in VLAN 101. IP addresses of IP phones and PCs are dynamically allocated by SwitchB, which is the DHCP server. IP addresses of IP phones, PCs, and the DHCP server are located on different network segments. When connecting to switches, IP phones undergo MAC address authentication, and PCs undergo 802.1x authentication. The configuration roadmap is as follows. Enable LLDP globally so that the voice VLAN ID can be allocated to IP phones. According to VLAN planning, add corresponding interfaces of SwitchA to the VLAN. Voice packets sent by IP phones have a low COS priority. To improve the priority of voice packets and ensure that voice packets are preferentially forwarded, enable the voice VLAN function on the interface. Configure SwitchA as a DHCP relay agent and SwitchB as a DHCP server so that IP addresses are allocated to IP phones and PCs. Configure 802.1x and MAC address authentication on SwitchA so that IP phones and PCs can access the network using 802.1x and MAC address authentication respectively. Configure 802.1x and MAC address authentication information on the authentication server controller. Now, let's see the specific configuration procedure. Step 1. Enable LLDP on SwitchA. Enter the system view. To differentiate devices, change the device name to SwitchA. Enable LLDP globally. Step 2. According to VLAN planning, add downlink interfaces of SwitchA to the corresponding VLAN. Create VLAN 100. Configure the downlink interface GE001. Enter the interface view. Set the link type to hybrid. Set the PVID of the interface to VLAN 101. Add the interface to Data VLAN 101 in untagged mode. Add the interface to Voice VLAN 100 in tagged mode. Configure another downlink interface, GE002. Because GE002 connects only to the IP phone, it only needs to be added to VLAN 100, not to VLAN 101. Enter the interface view. Set the link type to hybrid. The interface is added to Voice VLAN 100 in tagged mode. Because it only connects to the IP phone, it needs to be added to the Voice VLAN, not the Data VLAN. Step 3. Configure the Voice VLAN function on SwitchA. Enable the Voice VLAN function on GE001 and GE002, which are downlink interfaces connected to IP phones. In versions earlier than V200R003, switches can only identify voice packets based on MAC addresses. Therefore, the OUI of the voice VLAN, which corresponds to the IP phone's MAC address, needs to be configured. Configure the OUI of the first IP phone. Configure the OUI of the second IP phone. Step 4. configure the DHCP relay function on SwitchA. Enable DHCP globally. Create VLAN if 100. Assign an IP address to VLAN if 100. Enable the DHCP relay function on VLAN if 100. Configure the DHCP server address on the DHCP relay agent. The IP address of the DHCP server corresponds to the IP address of the VLAN if 200 on SwitchB. Configure the DHCP relay function on VLAN if 101 in the same way. The DHCP server of VLAN if 101 can be the same or a different server to that of the voice VLAN 100. Configure a VLAN if interface for communication between switch A and switch B. In this example, VLAN 200 is used for the communication between switch A and switch B. Create VLAN 200 and VLAN if 200. Assign an IP address to VLAN if 200. This IP address is on the same network segment as VLAN if 200 of SwitchB. Add the uplink interface to VLAN 200 as an access interface. Configure a default route. The next hop address of this route corresponds to the IP address of VLAN if 200 on SwitchB. Note that you do not need to configure a default static route if the DHCP relay agent is directly connected to the DHCP server. Step 5. Configure SwitchB as the DHCP server to allocate IP addresses to IP phones and PCs. Enter the system view. Modify the device name. Create an IP address pool for allocating IP addresses to IP phones. Configure the egress gateway address of the IP address pool. This address corresponds to the IP address of VLAN if 100 on SwitchA. Configure allocatable IP addresses in the IP address pool. These addresses must be on the same network segment as the egress gateway address. Create an IP address pool named PC for PCs in the same way as above. The egress gateway address is the IP address of VLAN if 101 on SwitchA. Enable DHCP. Create VLAN 200 and VLAN if 200. Assign an IP address for VLAN if 200. Configure SwitchB to allocate IP addresses from the global IP address pool to the IP phone. Add the downlink interface GE003 to VLAN 200 as an access interface. Configure a return route for the IP phone. Configure a return route for the PC. If an Avaya phone is used, it will fail to obtain an IP address through DHCP within 60 seconds due to the network delay or other causes. After the authentication timer expires, the Avaya phone repeatedly sends packets tagged with VLAN 0. However, the switch processes packets tagged with VLAN 0 in the same manner. Such packets are not processed in the voice VLAN. As a result, the Avaya phone fails to be authenticated and cannot connect to the switch. In V200 R00, 3C00 and later versions, you are advised to configure the OUI-based voice VLAN. For versions earlier than V200 R00, 3C00, you need to modify the value of the VLAN test timer of the IP phone in the following way. Press the star key and enter the password to access the menu. Select VLAN test and change the default value to 0. After the Avaya phone restarts, the timer settings are no longer effective and must be reconfigured. For Mattel 5212 phones, option 128, option 129, option 130 and option 131 need to be configured in the address pool of the DHCP server. Otherwise, These phones cannot identify DHCP offer packets sent by the DHCP server and cannot go online. There is no requirement for the configured value as long as the outgoing packets carry the following fields. Step 6. Configure a AAA domain on SwitchA. Create a Radius server template named IP phone. Configure the IP address of the Radius authentication server. Configure the IP address of the Radius accounting server. Configure the shared key of the Radius server. This key needs to be used in the controller. Enter the AAA view. Create an authentication scheme named Radius. Set the authentication mode to Radius. Configure a domain name to default. Configure the Radius authentication scheme. Configure the Radius server template IP phone. Step 7. Configure 802.1x and MAC authentication on SwitchA. The following procedure applies to all models running V200 R00, 9C00 and later versions. For models running V200 R00, 8C00, V200 R00, 7C00 and earlier versions, see the corresponding manual. Before configuring the authentication mode on SwitchA, set the NAC mode to Unified. Run the Display Authentication Mode command to view the NAC mode of an S switch. If the command output displays that the NAC mode is unified, the unified mode has been configured. Run the Authentication Unified Mode command to switch modes. After switching modes, save the configuration and restart the device to make the configuration take effect. After the restart is complete, perform the following steps to configure the authentication mode. Create an 802.1x access profile named IP phone. Create a MAC access profile named IP phone. When the username and password are specified in the MAC access profile, both the username and password are MAC addresses without separators or colons. Configure the authentication profile named IP phone. Bind the 802.1x profile to the MAC access profile. Enable MAC address bypass authentication. Finally, apply the authentication profile named IP phone to GE001 and GE002. The switches are now configured. Next, let's see how to configure the authentication server, Agile Controller, on which authentication information about the PC and IP phone needs to be configured. Before configuring the Agile Controller, ensure that routes between the Agile Controller and SwitchA are reachable. The configuration page of the Agile Controller varies by version. V100 R00 3C50 SPC 300 is used as an example here. Perform the following tasks. Step 1. Log into the Agile Controller. Create an 802.1x account. Choose Resource, User, User Management. Click Add in the Operations area on the right. Select Common Account and enter the account and password. The account and password must be the same as those configured on the PC. Set the username to be the same as the account. Click OK. Be aware that the account belongs to the user group named root. Step 2. Add SwitchA to the Agile Controller. Choose Resource, Device, Device Management. Click Add in the Operation area on the right. On the Add Device page, enter the name of SwitchA. The name is set as SwitchA in this example. Enter the IP address of SwitchA. Select Enable Radius in Radius Authentication Parameters. The device series remains Huawei S Series. The authentication and accounting key as well as the authorization key are the shared key Huawei 2012 of the Radius server configured on SwitchA. The real-time accounting period is not configured. Counting is performed based on the duration. Click OK to complete the configuration. Step 3. Add an IP phone to the Agile Controller. Add MAC address information to ensure that the MAC address can be used for authentication when the 802.1x client times out. choose Resource, Terminal, Terminal List. Click Add in the operations area on the right to access the Add Device Group page. On the Add Device Group page, add an IP phone group named IP phone. After the IP phone group is added, click Device Group in the navigation pane on the left, select IP phone, select Device List, and click Add to add an IP phone. Then, enter the MAC address of this IP phone and click OK. Repeat the procedure to add the MAC address of another IP phone. Step 4. Add an authentication rule to the Agile Controller. 2 authentication rules need to be added. One for the PC's 802.1x authentication, and the other for the IP phone's MAC address authentication. First, add the PC authentication rule. Choose Policy, Permission Control, Authentication and Authorization, Authentication Rule, and click Add. Set name to PC, set service type to Access, and set user group to Root. In the authentication information, select the authentication protocol that can be used. Click OK to complete the configuration. Add an IP phone authentication rule to the Agile Controller. Click Add. Set name to IP phone, set service type to MAC bypass authentication, and set terminal group to IP phone. Click OK to complete the configuration. Step 5. Add an authorization result. Choose Policy, Permission Control, Authentication and Authorization, Authorization Result. Click Add in the operation area on the right to create an authorization result. Set name to Voice VLAN 100. Set service type to MAC bypass authentication. Set VLAN to 100 in authorization parameter. Click Add in the following customized authorization parameters to add authorization information. Select Huawei from the vendor drop-down list. Set attribute ID to HW-voice-VLAN. Select integer in attribute type. Set attribute value to 1. This indicates that VLAN 100 is the voice VLAN. Select the new authorization information and click OK to complete the configuration. Step 6. Add an authorization rule. Add 2 authorization rules for both the PC and the IP phone. First, add the PC authorization rule. Choose Policy, Permission Control, Authentication and Authorization, Authorization Rule, and click Add. Set name to PC. Select Access in service type and set user group to the user group root. Select Permit Access in the authorization result. Click OK to complete the configuration. Add an IP phone authorization rule. Click Add. Set name to IP phone. Select MAC bypass authentication in service type and select IP phone in device group. Select Voice VLAN 100 in the authorization result. Click OK to complete the configuration. The configuration of the Agile Controller is complete, and the configuration of the IP phone interconnection through LLDP is completed. After the IP phone is powered on, it can be authenticated and connected to the network. After the IP phone goes online, you can run the Display Access User command on SwitchA to view connection information about IP phones.